Good morning, everybody. First of all, thank you very much for coming in such great numbers. I was amazed when I got here and I saw a long queue forming, and I thought that maybe it was the first day of the next sale and I'd missed something. In case you're wondering, I just have to get this out of the way because I know it's a question at the forefront of everybody's mind. This is the next suit. It's £250. It's right at the top end of our ranges, but they go down to £99. All of them are as stylish as the one that I'm wearing. We've got some very exciting speakers today. Paul Chesh and Angela Brady both will have unique insights, although I have to say, when I looked at the agenda, I was a little bit worried when I saw that John Lewis was on the I thought, what are the competition muscling in on my prize? But John, of course, is from Letchworth and nothing to do with the excellent retailer. The Wolfson Prize, Miles said, he said this couldn't be more different from the Euro question. Actually, there are some striking similarities, and the most striking similarity is the lack of serious public debate, serious imaginative, creative thinking about those two issues. It's as if there is somehow a political roadblock that is stopping really creative and constructive thought about new housing in Britain. And the prize is there to break that roadblock, to get new thinking out there. It's in a way permission and an invitation to think in a different way. And there's no question that we have a housing crisis in this country. I mean, our housing is the smallest and least affordable of any Western economy. It's an enormous economic restraint. It stops people. It reduces the mobility of people in the country. It means that we're piling a huge amount of money into servicing debt that is being piled into houses, and of course it is immensely socially divisive. There is an amazingly pervasive middle class myth in Britain that rising house prices make the country richer. Of course it doesn't make the country richer, it makes the people who've got houses richer at the expense of those who don't have houses. It's like any other form of inflation. Inflation doesn't make the country richer, it just makes some people richer. So here we have a problem that is a social problem, but an enormous economic opportunity. And this prize is an opportunity to throw away the rule book and start again. It's amazing how we become, as grown-ups, we become so used to the rules that surround us in terms of what we're allowed to do and what is possible and what is permitted, that we forget that those rules are man-made ultimately and that they can be changed. And this invitation isn't just an invitation to think about buildings, it is an invitation to think about the governance and the rules around building new places. And really there are only three constraints within the prize. The first and most important constraint is the constraint of the contestants, of your imagination. I think that there is so much negative publicity about the new. What people forget is just how much is possible, how much new technology will allow people to live in better societies, in better communities. Planning a city from the beginning, planning a city where the planners, as the city's built, have the knowledge of not just the motor car, and the railway, but also the cycle path, and they don't decide, as we all are used to in London having this choice, we can either healthily cycle and risk getting run over, or unhealthily drive and risk being late. So, the opportunity to build from afresh gives us a chance to think about infrastructure in a new way, and that's what we're looking for in this prize, are ideas, architectural infrastructure ideas that will inspire people and make people think, yes, I would like to live there, that is a fantastic idea. The second constraint is the constraint of financial reality. The city has to be self-financing. It cannot rely on the rest of the country to subsidise and support it, and nor should it. The creation of value is so great, turning an acre of brownfield or greenfield land into an acre of land with housing on it. The wealth creation from £20,000 an acre to over £1 million an acre is so enormous that any new city should not need subsidy. It would be unfair for it to get subsidy. and it's not just the private profit that can be harnessed, but also the public profit. There is absolutely no reason why infrastructure shouldn't be funded out of future revenues from rates and business taxes that will be raised in the new city. That's not a drain on public finances, because obviously the new city has created those new revenue streams. So it should be perfectly possible, and it is down to the prize entrants to prove that it's possible to build a financially viable, self-supporting, self-funding new city. There's something actually also more profound about the requirement for self-financing, in that it requires, whatever the city looks like, it requires it to be a city, not just one that the designers want people to live in, but a city that people actually want to live in, to build homes that people really want to live in, not the homes that planners or politicians or social architects want them to live in, but the houses that people actually want to live in. And when you look at the mistakes of the past, particularly those mistakes where government money has been involved, so much of those mistakes have been about people imagining a life for other people that those other people do not want. It is a soul-destroying thing that you will all notice if you travel up, and as much as I do, if you travel on the motorways of Great Britain. It is astounding how many new housing estates built within the last 20 years are built within sight of, you can almost see people in their front room, within sight of the roar of a motorway. You know, what sort of policy system do we have that allocates land so blighted to homes for people? Who could possibly have thought anyone would actually really want to live there? I asked someone about this actually. I asked someone, this is a little anecdote for you. I asked someone who had been responsible for one of these, the allocation of land right by motorway. So why did you allocate this land for housing? And the astonishing answer came back that it was allocated because the land was considered so blighted that, you know, farm animals wouldn't graze there because it was so noisy, and the pollution from the cars was so dangerous that any crops grown there would, you know, I'd be unlikely to thrive. That obviously the thing to do was to put humans there. And it's that mentality that we have to break and to create, and that is why this sort of, the financial reality is more important than just money. It's about creating things that people want. And finally, an issue that I'm hoping will be addressed is the issue of fairness and consent. One of the reasons why so many people are against development in this country is because if that development happens to be near you, you are more than likely to be a loser from it. That the system of compensating people whose lives are blighted by new development, or whose properties are reduced in value, or whose properties are taken away from them, the system of compensation is so meagre and insufficient to properly and fairly compensate people for what they're losing, that it is not surprising that we have a culture that is against any form of local development. And if new garden cities are going to be successful, they have to be successful on the basis that the relatively small number of people who currently live in the area that that city is built consent to the building of the city, and that means having proper, giving them not just compensation, but a real fair share of the enormous amount of wealth and opportunity that will be created by a new city, to win people over, not just by the money that can be offered to them, but also by the opportunities that a new city brings to any community. And it is that sense of winning people over that has to be an essential part of any new development. So those are the three elements: imagination, sensible finances, and fairness and consent. Those are the three constraints that, but the only constraints that will limit entrance to this prize. The final point I'd make is that what this prize is all about is really about optimism. It is about teasing out a little bit of the spirit that built the finest cities in our country. Ironically, the cities that were built long before the Planning Acts. But you know, in Georgian times, if you had an old house, it was a bit like having an old car today. People thought, you know, actually building new things in those days was considered a good thing, and we must convince people that building new can not only be acceptable, but can be an improvement on the past. It is an optimism and a belief that our generation, our age, can leave something that future generations will look back at and go, gosh, look at that. That was built at the turn of the millennium. They knew how to do things in those days. That's it.
Great, thank you very much, Simon. We have time for some questions now to Simon, and we should have some roving microphones, I hope. People with the roving microphones, please stand up. Yep, over there. So, and people who are standing at the back, can I ask you to put your hand up if you're sitting next to a blank seat, so that the people at the back can come and sit down. Let's release these three here as well, so three of you could go in there. Who would like, now I have to confusingly ask you to put your hands back down again, so I ask, who would like to ask Simon a question? Yes, we've got one here. So Katie is zooming around. Please do wait for the mic, because of course we're being audio recorded, so if you speak without the mic, you won't go anywhere. Can you say who you are?
Richard Wolf, architect. Simon, thank you for a rousing start to the day. My question is, do you feel that we're suffering from analysis paralysis on this issue?
It's a really good question. One of the lessons that I was taught as a child is that the worst decision is no decision. Absolutely, I agree with you that, and it's not just new cities, but you could extend the idea maybe to new airports, that we spend so long trying to making sure that we get absolutely the right decision that we forget actually the work we are in the process of making the worst decision, which is to do nothing for 3, 5, 20 years, and those years are lost. So absolutely, I agree with you. We will never find the perfect. We have to be happy with going for something that is good. And if something may be better around the corner, well, we can't wait another 3 years to find it. I agree.
Okay, we have another one here, a gentleman
here. Simon, Andrew Simcock. Very interested in your comments about the compensation element of what you were talking about, people who live nearby where these proposed developments are taking place. Just to be absolutely clear, you're suggesting that entrants should be taking that into account with their submissions.
Absolutely, and it should be part of their financial plan, a certain amount of money, facilities, whatever it is that they're going to offer to the local community to make sure that the local people are properly, not just compensated, but rewarded for contributing to the whole society by allowing the development of a new city.
Okay, John Stewart at the back there. And then I think I saw a hand go up somewhere here. Yes, the lady there with the pen.
John Stewart from the Home Builders Federation. Thanks very much for your comments and for having the prize in the first place. It's a fantastic initiative. I've got two questions, to be very cheeky. Do you have a sense of how large a garden city is? I was involved in a radio interview the other day, and the other person said a scheme of 3,000 units was a garden city. It struck me as a fairly mainstream site for a house builder. And also, do you see a role for the state? And I'm thinking particularly of land assembly, because there's likely to be a pretty hostile reaction to the private sector marching in and trying to do this. And also on the question of financing, there's more a cash flow question. Massive amounts of money that will be needed for primary infrastructure before those tax and council tax revenues begin flowing, and how do you bridge that gap? Can the private sector do that, do you think?
Okay, lots of very good questions. Role for the state. I think there's a role for legislation, but not necessarily. I think any new city would require enabling legislation. It's going to require changes in governance. If future revenue streams from taxation, from local taxes, are going to be allocated to a development corporation, then yes, of course, legislation will be involved. So yes, I think legislation will be involved. I would be, I don't want to prejudge the prize, especially as I'm not actually judging it. I've got a panel of much better people to judge it. So I don't want to be too prescriptive about that, but I don't think that we want a sort of a state monolith developer to do it. That's not my personal vision. In terms of the size, I think it has to be a city in the normal sense of the word. I think clearly 3,000 people isn't enough. And it has to be capable of becoming a city. I think, I'm not saying it has to be built a city overnight. So I think that, but I think in the normal understanding of what the term city means, this must lay the foundations for that. In terms of land assembly, again, same comment really about legislation to enable CPOs. in terms of financing, I would invite entrants to, again, be creative about what the sort of instruments that could be created. I don't think there's a problem with financing, generally. If you look at the market, the bond market, it has never been cheaper. So for the company I work for, it has never been cheaper to raise money on the bond market. We issued a bond for £250 million. It was oversubscribed 5 times. So there's an awful lot of money looking for a safe home. And what you have to convince investors is that it is a safe home. And actually, land with permission to build on it, with a sensible plan, it will be considered by many a very safe investment because you've got an asset behind it. The second thing is to think about things like, rather than compulsory purchase orders, compulsory purchase options. Most development, a lot of development is financed in essence through options rather than through outright acquisitions. So you have an option over land, then you get planning permission, then you go back and buy it. So I think that I can see a system of concentric compulsory purchase options being an idea as to how you could manage the finances. I only give that as an idea, not as a solution. But I suppose in doing so, what I'd like to point out is that it doesn't take a great deal of creativity or imagination to think through to ways that you could finance such a big project.
Okay, thank you. We have the lady here, and then I'm going to take one from the block here, then the gentleman there.
Good morning, Tracy Coleman, Delivery Programme Director for Woking Borough Council. We deliver quite a few very large development schemes, and I just wonder how you feel about the generic approach that we're encouraged to take at the moment, in so much as, particularly in relation to the consultation process and so much as the communities that we are developing, those people haven't arrived, and we're making assumptions about their wants and their needs and their preferences, and a community where people feel part of it. I think that we need to move away from the generic approach into an approach where it develops and moves forward as it's created.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, and again, I'm not going to be, I don't want to make a comment about what type of community ought to be created or what the rules ought to be. I think the only comment I would make is that clearly the rules we have at the moment, the consultation periods that we have at the moment, the way we're doing things at the moment isn't delivering enough homes of the quality that we need, and we need to think in a new way about it. What those new ways are is really what this prize is all about.
Okay, thank you. We have the gentleman here. And now I'm going to take the 2 that I spotted here.
James Michelle is an urban designer. Can I ask what it was in particular about garden cities that made you include the word garden in the title of the question?
It's a very good question. I think it's to make the idea of city more acceptable, if I'm going to be absolutely honest. I think it was and you've rumbled it as a marketing gimmick, and you are quite right.
Didn't say that. We'll find that.
I think the idea that we want to get across actually is that new cities don't have to be dense urban environments without any blade of grass, and that we wanted to create the idea, or put in people's minds the idea that a new city, a new urban environment should harness the beauty of nature and bring nature to people, rather than sort of create cities where nature is something you go and visit on long weekends. But actually that a new city should have gardens and green spaces within it. That's really all that we're trying to get across.
Okay, the gentleman here in the blue shirt, jacket, please. Sir? You wanted to ask a question? Gentleman next to you.
Oh, yeah.
Or is it?
Not anymore, no.
I was just wondering whether you just answered it. But the date for handing in is the 3rd of March.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah, and so when you're talking about new thinking, and we've already heard that this is about a how, therefore, roughly speaking, a technological approach, short time, technological approach, and yet your emphasis on the problem that people coming into the town have had something designed for them. I mean, there's a big sort of Lacanian issue with that nobody who does this seems to be aware of.
I don't understand the question.
The big other, the idea that you're using a language of technology which is actually organising your whole approach, your whole belief, your whole reality is this technology. Supposing the answer lies in the opposite to technology, as in say Ruskin, Emerson, people who had romance in mind, but the quality of life as an outcome.
If I gave the impression that technology is the answer to new cities, it was a mistake. I think new technology is a reality, and it's a reality that a lot of our existing cities haven't had built into them. So, you know, there are plenty of things that could. There are so many examples here. For example, the central provision of hot water, rather than everyone heating up their own water, is an idea. It might be a good idea, it might be a bad idea. It happens to be technological, but it is not about, you know, people wearing space helmets and, you know, living in oxygen bubbles. It is technology to make real human life better, rather than to make us be living in a techno city. That's not the idea.
Okay, I have one at the back, and then I'm going to take the gentleman by the column there, and then the gentleman in the red jumper there.
Jerry Hughes, Senior Director at GVA. I'm assuming that when we talk about cities, we're also talking about the economic dimension as well as just building homes, otherwise it becomes a satellite town or a satellite city. So I'm assuming that as part of this process, we want to think about how we create jobs for people who are going to be living in this new northern city.
It depends on your philosophy. There is a philosophy that says that once you've got a critical mass of people, they will automatically generate the jobs that are required there. There is a philosophy that says that you can't create jobs overnight, and that you have to create somewhere that is within reach of another city to kickstart it, and then in time it will develop its own employment. And I think that is very much down to the view of the entrance rather than the diktat of the judges. I think it's very unlikely that overnight you could create employment. In fact, you know, creating employment is much harder than creating cities. But it is amazing how large conurbations do create their own employment, and that employers, when they see a large conurbation of, you know, nice, affordable housing, relatively affordable, not affordable housing in the sort of jargon sense of the word, but actually is affordable to the sort of people who want to work or might work for them, they then locate there. So I think as long as you've got the areas of business, personally, I think the jobs will find the people. But that is a question very much for the entrance rather than the diktat of the judges.
Okay, I'm going to take the three that I've already pointed out, and then I'm afraid we need to move on to hear Angela. But don't worry, because Simon's around all morning and will be joining the session with the judges later. So hold on to questions that you have for him and others later. So you, sir.
Peter Fenn, Government Youth Architects. It's a process question, Simon. If one were shortlisted, do the judges pass comments on the submission when it goes into the next stage?
The short answer is yes.
Okay, thank you.
The gentleman in the red jumper there. Well, we can come back to that in my comments at the end. I'll say some more about that. Jenny, the microphone to immediately behind the pillar there.
Good morning. My name is Mahmoud Hilmi. I'm an architect. And I apologize sincerely that I missed the first 10-15 minutes of your talk.
It wasn't that much, don't
I'm
worry.
not saying. The things I'd like to ask is how much sustainability or energy efficiency of your development will be part of the scheme in view of the climate change. Point one. And also the point you made just now about the fact that in even high density, we can introduce greenery and thus biodiversity, surface water flow, and things like that. So avoiding the sort of problems we're having now, because due to climate change, we anticipate higher temperatures, higher sea levels. And I'm just wondering that if, for example, if you consider building next to a motorway, blighted land, but of course you don't do that, but then you move it away from it. But if it's poor agricultural land, then which has a lower value, can this be used as a way forward of designing slightly more kind of relaxed scheme in a sense?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing on sustainability is that the new development must be within the law. We're not adding any sustainability requirements to those already in place in the United Kingdom. So there are no additional sustainability requirements that would apply to this. And it's down to entrants to decide how to get the balance between sustainability and economic viability that they think is most attractive. In terms of density, again, I think that is it's not It's not something that the prize is telling people what to do. We're looking for ideas. If people come up with ideas that are high density, but also harness nature and are environmentally friendly, then I'm sure that that will be something that would be a good thing for a city. But I suspect that any new city is not going to be one or the other. That, you know, if you look at the great cities of the world, they are not just high density or just suburbs. They are a mixture of both of those things. And I think the concept of the zoning of the city will be something that's very interesting to see how people come up with ideas for that.
Great, thank you. And our final question for this first session.
From Kingston University. It's a related question, I guess, sort of related to energy, but if development in the room seems to be transport that's not really been discussed. And I was just wondering if in the sort of the conditions of the guidance for the prize, whether there's any sort of suggestion that the proposal should avoid the risk that the town or city becomes effectively a commuter development where people are just travelling like a satellite town. And they even appear to have the ambition to seek innovative new urban forms, such as car light or even car-free development.
Again, we're not being prescriptive about that. And the question is, will people want to live there? You know, that is, will people want to live there? Will they be able to live there? Will it suit their lifestyles? If people believe actually a car light city is something that would attract a lot of people to live in the city, then you know, that is what they should enter. But what they shouldn't do is try and build a car light city on the basis that people there would like cars, but we won't let them have them because, you know, we think that that's bad. Because I think that would fail the economic viability test. Ultimately, you've got to build somewhere that people want to live. And actually, I think there is a very good mix between that. So how many more people would cycle rather than take their car if they could do so undercover on perfectly smooth surfaces without the risk of being, I think it's called right hooked by a bus, was not there. So, you know, I think you can design those things in without necessarily enforcing them.
Okay, great. That's all we've got time for now. We do need to move on. But as I said, there's an opportunity to ask some more questions of Simon and the judges later in the morning. So for now, I could ask you to thank Simon.